Let's talk about getting a modern pop punk drum sound like this. In this video, I will break down my approach to get big and punchy pop-punk drums. And don't forget, if you like what you hear and want your next song to sound like this, then fill out the contact form at terrybeckleyrecording.com and I will get back to you. The link is in the description. Okay, so let's start with the kick. We've got these 4 kick channels here. We've got a kick in mic, a kick out mic, and 2 one-shot samples that are all blended together and are then bussed to this kick bus channel here. The kick in and the kick out mic both came from GGD Modern and Massive, as you can see here. And then the one-shot samples were samples that I created myself and then used Trigger here. So let's hear what they sound like. Kick in. Kick out. My first one-shot. And the second one-shot. The thought process here was to get 2 one-shot samples that were quite mid-rangey to fill in that part of the kick. I didn't want it to sound too metal. So let's look at the kick-in processing. We've got a Pro Q3 just dipping out some of the mids here at 900 Hertz. And then a distressor with a attack as slow as it can be, release as fast as it can be, but you can see here it's in parallel as the mix is only set to 54%, 4:1 ratio. And the kick out mic just got some EQ on here, getting rid of all that top end information, even though it's not really there. It's good just to clean it up. And then there's a little bit of mud here at 128. So when they were blended together, these two, they should sound like one kick drum. And then hopefully you can hear when the kick out drum is added in, it just fills out that low end. Now the kick one shot, we've got here Trigger and some EQ, just again dipping out some muddy frequencies. With 4 different kick mics blending together, it's nice to make sure that the low end's going to be even and no sort of build up. So I'd have been taking out certain frequencies of each one that sounded a little bit too muddy. Now let's look at the second one shot sample. Got Trigger, and no, don't think nothing's happening on this. Is why it's muted. Now let's hear all 4 of them together. I take out the mid-rangey one shots. See how much that fills in the mids, makes it a much more balanced kick drum. And as you saw, there was minimal processing on any of those kick drum mics because I like to treat them all as one sound on the kick bus. So let's see what we've got here. Okay, first of all is a studio rack from Waves, and what this allows me to do is to use Waves plugins, but either like split the frequency bands like I've done here. So I've got the CLA 76, but it's only working on the frequencies above 80 Hertz, so I can keep that sub from being brought into the compressor. There is a reason behind that, is that I want to control the low end with the C4, the multi-band compressor later on. Let's have a listen to this. Yeah, I can really work on the attack of the kick drum without and leaving that sub untouched. Pretty cool addition to the Waves plugins there, the studio rack. Then next we have the C4. Yep, all the bands bypass apart from the sub, so I can keep that controlled separately. And that's why here I've got this dip here. I can go away and listen to it in other speakers, make sure that I've got enough low end or I haven't got too much, and I can just use this as like a low end fader, basically, to adjust how much of that sub I want in there. Yes, I could do that with the kick out mic, but I do like to treat them all as one sound, as one kick drum. And we've got another distressor. Again, this is a 50-50 parallel mix, as the mix knob's only at 50%. 6:1 ratio, a little bit more gentle here with a slow attack, but not all the way. Again, with a fast release, but again, not all the way. to give it some punch, and then blend it into to where I think it sounds punchy but natural. And now you'll notice I haven't got any parallel drum track. That's because I'm doing what I want in parallel on the plugins. You know, if I was using plugins that didn't have a mix knob option, then I would have a parallel mix bus, and I would bring in the added attack or whatever I wanted from there. Okay, some kick bus EQ. I've got a slight 3 decibel boost, about 7k, not doing anything else. These are samples, so they already sound really good. You can fall into a trap of over EQing your samples, having too much of that clicky typewriter sound, or not enough mids, or too much sub, something like that. You can go too far because they're samples. They don't need cleaning up. You don't need to do much to them. I think that was a common mistake I was making when I was starting, was I was over EQing sampled drums. And then just a couple of notches here, cleaning up something. So in the build up, as there's 4 samples all blended in together, I wasn't liking what I was hearing here at 400 hertz. And again here at sort of 4K, that would have been a chirpy sound that sometimes when you want to boost the top end of a kick drum, you can get that sort of, it sounds like a bird is chirping into the mic. I hate that sound, so that's why I've notched that out here. And these would be things that I would bring in and bring out if needed. I obviously had them in at one point and then thought, no, I didn't want them. Took them out again, but they're there just in case I ever wanted to go back and add them in. Let's have a listen to the kick bus processing on and off. So this is off. And this is on. See, minimal EQ moves, that's quite a difference. You don't need to over EQ your samples. Okay, now let's have a look at the snare. We've got a snare top, snare bottom mic, both from Modern and Massive by GGD. Then you've got the snare one shot, which will be quite a roomy sounding sample. Sort of add that kind of snare drum in a space feel. And then you've got a snare room sample as well, also from Modern and Massive. Okay, so let's see what they all sound like. This is the snare top mic. Notice that there's kick bleed in there. I like having that in my snare mic. I just feel like when it's missing, I miss it. Snare bottom mic sounds like this. And the sample. Like I said, a very ruby one-shot sound. And the snare room. Yep, so snare room, snare bottom, snare top, all from Modern and Massive GGD. The one shot is my own. Let's have a look at the processing. So first off, I'll do this to a lot of sampled snare drums, is use a transient designer. This is the only one I feel like does what I want, the SPL. Usually I'll just boost the sustain. I always feel like sampled snare drums lack that sustain, which does put them in give them a natural sort of sounding decay. And though in this instance I boosted the attack as well. It does sound strange by itself, but there is a reason for this, and I'll get into that. So let's hear that with the transient designer on. There's so much snap, so much attack to that snare now. There is a reason. Later on, if you look at my plugin chain, there's the distortion here at the end. So I'll explain that move in more detail then. A bit of Pro Q3, just getting rid of some weird resonances. Let's have a listen. So you can see I'm just narrowing in on frequencies I don't like. Weird knocks or weird like ooh sounds. Don't know how else to describe those. And then running it through a Shep 73. Like my vocal video, I'm not touching any of the controls. I'm just running it through the plugin because it has its own sort of sound. And now the distortion, my secret weapon on snare. Let's I'll turn the distortion on and you'll see how the snare just comes to life. I know there's a volume change there, of course there is, it's distortion, but it's also squashing it quite a bit and really bringing it to life. In fact, it's like there's no snare there and suddenly the snare arrives when you turn the distortion on. Now that paired with, like I said earlier, with this boost here on the attack of the transient designer, they work together to create that sound. I feel like if you just distort the snare, you lose that attack. you lose that punch. So you can sort of offset that trade-off by boosting the attack on the transient designer to run into the distortion. Let's listen to the distortion without the transient designer and see if you can tell what I mean. The distortion just makes it too much of a splat, I think. I think when you add in the boost and the transient designer with the distortion, it just creates life and energy. Okay, snare bottom, let's see what we got. Just getting rid of the low end here on the snare bottom, because you don't need that in a snare bottom track. And then this is probably just a build up I didn't like here. And some compression to get what you want out of the snare bottom track. You can sort of change the vibe of the snare depending on how much you want to compress the snare bottom. So here I've got a medium release and a slow attack. I would just be turning them at random until I felt like it vibed with what I wanted. Another Pro Q3, just taking out weird resonances again, similar to the other snare track that we had. And the snare one shot, no EQ on this one, it's just the trigger. Snare room, got here a bit of Valhalla room all the way down the mix knob to 15%. I think it would just be pushing the snare back a little bit. Let's have a listen to it with and without, see what it does. Yeah, again, just puts that snare in a space. Just really emphasizing the room part of it. Helps to create your, helps to give your program drums authenticity. And then, yeah, I've pulled the attack back and boosted the sustain on the transient designer again to make this a room track. And those four will be routed to this snare bus track here. Again, and more notches. A little boost here. This is probably once I've listened to it out somewhere in my car, something like that, and I felt like I needed a little bit more presence. So I've got a slight 1.5 dB boost there. And the tiniest boost here at, again, about 2K. But just to give it a bit more nastiness, it probably sounded a bit too nice. And then a slight bump here in the body of the snare at about 220 Hertz. Let's have a listen to the snare before and after. So this is before. And this is after. You just breathe life into the snare, basically. And then before I move on mixing drums, I do like to listen to the kick and snare relationships. Let's have a quick listen to see how they gel together. What I'm listening for is to make sure they don't sound completely separate. Obviously, they're going to sound like different drums, but I don't want them to sound like one of them's floating off in space somewhere. Or I'm listening to two drums in two different rooms, which would just stop it sounding like it was a drum kit. It would just sound like samples. Okay, next up, toms. Minimal processing on toms. They're just bus to a tom bus here. And then I will have a little bit of EQ. Bit of low pass and high pass filtering going on. Slight boost here at 5K. Another boost here at about 2K. This is to be heard through the guitars. And of course, you want to make sure the tom sounds balanced. You don't want it just poking through, sounding thin. So there'll be a boost here, about 150 Hertz. And then it looks like I'm pulling out some of that mid-range to actually emphasize the low and the low end and the top end. You pull away the mids slightly, and you'll hear naturally more low end and top end come out. Then put them into Saturn 2 for some saturation. Warm tape, not doing much, 24%. And this level here would be a boost, just so that they can be heard through the guitars and everything else. Toms, I find, always get buried under guitars when you bring them in. So the kick bus, the snare bus, the tom bus, they'll all be going to another bus, which I call shells. And I've got a clipper on here, DF clip, Drumforge, from Drumforge. As you can see, I'm barely doing anything, but I've got it split so that everything under 200 Hertz isn't touched. And I literally just a value of 1 there for everything above that. Let's see what that does. See, quite the difference. Even though it's just 1, I feel like if it was under 200s, it would start to blow the clipper out a bit more, make it sound a bit too muddy. That's why I've bypassed the 200, which is a great tool, which is why I use the DF clipper over something like JST clip, which I do use, but I feel like being able to only clip certain frequencies is just fantastic. Okay, next we've got overheads, hi-hats, no ride in this song, or no individual ride mic on this song, and drum room. And these would be the drum room, I think, is bus straight to the drum bus, but then you've got the hi-hats and the overheads will be bus to this cymbal bus here, and then just limited. So on the overheads track, we're getting rid of this low end here. I like to treat my overheads as just the sparkly overhead part of the drum sound. I'll use the rooms to fill in the rest of it. That's why I get rid of a lot of the low mids from here, as you will hear. Yeah, getting rid of that sort of low rumble sound. And then these two dynamic EQ points will be getting rid of the nastiness that can build up. There'll be a lot of that throughout the overhead and room channels to try and keep that smooth top end. Yeah, I've got a Pultec EQ after that, boosting 8K, boosted and attenuated pretty much, because you'll get that boost and then it will attenuate around it. That's how you can get such good smooth top end boosts on the Pultec EQs. And I've got a CLA 76, slow attack, fast release. It won't be compressing too much. I find that if you drive overheads into it, it gets pretty nasty pretty quickly. And then Soothe 2, one of my favorite plugins ever. Set to an 81% mix here. I've got what I thought was a bit nasty, but sort of 2.5K. And then around 5K as well. This is would have started at the matte cymbals preset and then worked in from there to find the specific parts of these cymbals that I didn't like. And then into Saturn 2 for some saturation, warm tape. I didn't want to saturate the 1K area. I felt like I've got a little bit of saturation here. See, 55%. And I've got what's left of the low end of the overhead track is at 62%. And then this is just set down the middle. But you'll see I've brought the level down 2 decibels. Another great feature of the Saturn 2 is that you can treat it in a multi-band fashion if you feel like you need to. Let's have a listen to before and after. And after. See how much smoother that sounds? The more and more you push it through compressors and all the way to the end and then the mastering chain, it just starts to get so nasty. And I feel like if you listen to songs from, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of punk songs do have that nasty cymbal sound. And although it's part and parcel of pop punk music and that kind of stuff, getting that nice smooth top end just really helps with this modern pop punk sound. A hi-hat would have been pretty much a copy of the overhead track, so I won't bore you with those details. Now let's listen to the drum room. Yep, it's a drum room. Doesn't sound too lively. I like to smash my drum rooms to get the extra energy out of them and fill in the low end that I took away from the overheads track. So when they melded together, they sound like a proper drum sound. Let's see what we got. Pretty much a copy of the settings from the overhead channel, because the same problems are going to exist in the overhead track as the room, right? Even when they recorded the samples, I'm sure the same thing. They recorded in the same room, so they're going to have the same issues. Pro Q3, just taking off the sub. Didn't want it to interfere with my low end. And then build up here at 4K. And a little off the top so that it doesn't interfere with the brightness of the overheads. So that's why I think of them as a jigsaw piece that slots together. The room fills in everything I've taken out of the overheads, and the overhead fill in everything that's not there in the rooms. Compression, driving it a bit harder this time. A slower attack here to create more transient so I can really sort of drive the compressor. I like to get my room sounding quite trashy. I've got it's set to all here as well, so it's really, really compressing it hard. And finishing off with some saturation. I've really, all the way here, 93%. And I haven't even done it in parallel because I really want the rooms to sound smashed, because that's where I find a lot of the drum energy comes from. So let's have a listen to before and after. This is before. And this is after. I like to smash the rooms. See, I like to control the overheads and get them to sound nice and smooth, because that's the top end. And then the rooms I like to smash and fill in the missing frequencies. So let's hear them together, and I'll take the rooms out and add them in so you can see how they work independently and how they fit together. So hopefully you heard how the overheads provide that shimmery top end, and the rooms fill in all that energy and the lower frequency information. So nearly there. All of those will go to a drum bus. Let's have a listen to what we've got going on here. Non-linear Summer from Waves. Love this plugin. Love how the saturation sounds on this. I've gone for the mic channel here because I feel like it just adds way more energy. The Neve, like I mentioned in my vocal mixing video, is much smoother, but the mic is the one where it gives you the energy that you want, or that I want. And then got some bus compression here, the SSL comp. Probably only doing about 2 to 3 decibels at any time. Makeup gain will be set just to level that out. Yeah, 3 decibels. And I've got a ratio of 4:1. Soothe again, probably felt like it was getting a little trashy once it went through the compressors and the extra saturation. So I've got this boosted here between about around 4K. Keeping that top end smooth. And then the JST clip. Oh, used to use this clipper before I discovered the one from the DF clip from John Forge. But this one would be, I've got it set to 2, but I'll definitely trim this one back. Yeah, see, -6. So without it, I think it would have been way too loud. So that's why I use that to gain stage. Let's have a listen before and after. This is before. Now let's turn the drum bus on. Cool, obnoxious, punchy, pop punk drums. Let's hear it in with the whole track again. So there you have it. Remember, if you want your next song to sound like this, head over to terrybeckleyrecording.com, contact me through the contact page there, and I'll get back to you. If you want to see my previous video on how I mix the vocals to this song, the link will be in the description. And if you want to see more mixing tutorials on pop, punk and metal, and similar aggressive rock sounding genres, then please subscribe to my channel. I've done the vocals and drums to this song. I'll be going through the bass and guitars next, and I'll be going on to some metal stuff in the future. But thanks very much for listening. Hopefully talk to you through my website, and if not, I'll see you at the next one.